All right, guys, welcome to the Buff Show. Today we have Pete Doumit with IGES here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
Yeah, welcome. So this is an episode I've been wanting to do for a while, all on geologic work, soils, what to do if you're buying a lot. And we have the expert in the house with us today. So thanks again.
Happy to be here.
Do you want us to give us a little bit of background about you and your company and what you guys do?
Sure. I work for IGES, which stands for GeoEnvironmental Services Incorporated. We are a geotechnical engineering firm that specializes in geotechnical engineering, geologic hazards, landfills, that sort of thing. Some of the environmental side of things, but that's kind of what we do in a nutshell. We do a lot of work up and down the Wasatch Front to into the adjacent states, roads, commercial buildings, residential developments. You pretty much name it, we're involved in it. So for me personally, I'm the lead geologist at IGES and specializing in geologic hazards. So with regard to all the different developments that are going on, especially as the flatlands are mainly taken up already, people are moving further and further up on the hills into more hazardous areas. So dealing with landslides, slope stability, that sort of thing. And that's what I specialize in.
That's awesome. No, we're excited to have you here. So the outline of this show is going to be basically catered to, I mean, the people that I imagine watching this are going to be people looking at buying some land to build their dream home on or something like that, right?
Sure.
And so what are some things that they need to know? Like what is a geologic report? And then we can jump into like why do they need it and things like that.
Sure. Specifically with regard to Weber County, if the home or the lot falls within what's been designated as a geologic hazard special study area, then the county will require what's called a geologic site reconnaissance, which is a reconnaissance level study. It's basically boots on the ground. A qualified professional geologist like myself would go out, do an initial survey of the ground surface. So I guess an important point with regard to that is surface has to be free of snow cover.
Right.
Like we got to be able to see the ground
true.
surface in order to do that reconnaissance level study. If for whatever reason we see features on the ground surface indicative of, hey, I see hummocky topography or I see cracks on the side slope, anything indicating potential movement or past movement, then we would want to recommend a further geologic hazard study, a design level geologic hazard study where we dig some test pits or trenches to kind of figure out exactly what's going on there. But that's ultimately the first step that the county would require for somebody trying to build their dream home if it falls in that hazard area.
Yeah. And the Weber County has a mapping tool on their GIS, on their Weber County parcel viewer that you can like add in a layer that will show the hazard areas. Basically, if you're in the red, which is most of Ogden Valley,
right,
you have to have this done before building. And the reason it's important to know if you have to have it done is because this report is going to tell you how intense your footings and foundation have to be like attached to the ground, right? So we're just trying to avoid somebody buying a lot that they're like, oh, the views up here are amazing and we have a budget of $2 million to build this house and we're building a 7,000 square foot house, and like if they have all their funds allocated right, an additional $200,000 to $400,000 foundation expense could really make or break the deal for them, right?
Sure.
And so like getting all those unknowns out of the way, and I think the foundation or the base layer is the biggest one that people need to check in first, because like once the base is good, like going up vertically, you can kind of mitigate your expenses pretty well from there.
Sure.
But I'm sure both of us have seen huge fluctuations in prices depending on where people are building and what they have to do with their footings and foundations.
No
right?
doubt about it.
Can you give us like maybe one or two experiences of bad cases that you've seen where somebody had to do more intense footings and foundations?
Sure, can certainly do that. We we worked on a project where one of our clients was wanting to build at the top of a fault scarp, which is the expression in the surface of where a fault projects from below to above the ground. So it's usually a really steep slope, and then this particular client wanted to build on top of that slope, where there will be, in the event of an earthquake, there would be an inordinate amount of ground shaking. So in order to make that happen, they would have to have really expensive, closely spaced drilled piers down to excessive depths, and in order to make it work.
That's crazy.
So, yeah, it was a project that, to them it was worth it.
Yeah.
For their views, for their lot, but they were able to make it work from the engineering perspective. But that's just one of those examples of engineering can make some challenging sites work, but it's going to cost you.
Right. And that's where uncovering that up front before you buy the lot is good to know, because then you can determine how feasible it is for you, right?
That's exactly
for
right.
some people, it might be out of the question,
Right.
So you mentioned that in the wintertime, you guys can't really do like a site analysis. Are there cases where if it's covered in snow and the buyer's needing to purchase a lot quickly, could you guys go in there and dig test pits and check it?
We can.
And because you can do that in the wintertime?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. It's one of those things where the normal process that we like to do the site reconnaissance first before the test pits, because for me, I'd be able to go out and say, hey, this looks fishy over here.
Yeah.
This looks problematic over here. So this is where I actually want to dig a test pit.
Right.
If somebody is in a time crunch, the snow will not preclude us from being able to get out and get our study done. We just may not be able to put the test pit in a location that we particularly want to or need to. And what it might result in is we dig a couple test pits, and maybe in one of them everything looks all clear, the other one looks pretty suspicious, so we're like, we actually probably need to do a couple more to figure out what's going on here. Whereas had we done the initial study without the snow cover, we could say, I want one here, I want one here, I want one here, because I have a pretty good idea of this is where the problem area is.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So keep in mind the best times to get these done are when there's no snow.
Ideally. Yes.
Can you, let's say, I'm just curious on what the cost of is for the initial just site study. Is there a ballpark range that you guys see these fall into?
Yeah, and that depends. It depends on the size of the lot and the scope of the project, right? And it also depends on what somebody wants to do right now as opposed to later. Give you an example. Let's say somebody has a 3-acre lot. Mm-hmm. We could do an initial study that covers that entire 3 acres, or covers only, let's say they're only looking at putting a home on half an acre of that 3-acre lot. We can do our evaluation specifically for where they want to build now, or do the evaluation for the entire acreage. The advantage to do the entire acreage is once the study's done, you don't have to come back and do it again.
Yeah.
Whereas if you only did the half acre right now, you come back in 5 years and say, hey, I want to put a mother-in-law suite over here or whatever, you'd have to go through the same process with the city. And so you'd have to incur the same expense.
If not more at that point.
That's exactly right. So in terms of cost, for if it's just reconnaissance level, at least for us, a lot of times those fall in the ballpark of $2,000 to $3,000 for that initial site reconnaissance. And what that involves is I'd go out to the site, do some mapping, see if I see anything going on. I'd look at the geologic maps, historical aerial photographs, any LiDAR imagery that is available to see if there's anything going on. Look at if anybody's done any geotechnical or geologic hazard studies nearby, and just review all that literature, perform a site visit, do some mapping, form some preliminary conclusions, and write it up in a formal report. And so in that study, it would be recommended either, hey, I don't see anything major problematic. I would say, yeah, you're probably okay to go to construction at this point, or, I really think that a further study is necessary here.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so at the same time, so if we did proceed to the further study, the full-blown geotechnical and geologic hazard study, that's much more intensive, much more expensive, because we're doing a lot more work where you got subsurface work involved, test pits and trenching and that sort of thing, really trying to figure out what exactly is going on there. For one of those types of studies, that usually, I would say, falls in the ballpark of anywhere from $9,000 to $15,000.
Okay.
It might fall in that range. If it is a really, really problematic area, let's say we go out and we trench and we find landslide deposits that are really bad. Let's say that they're deeper. Initially, we'll do trenching, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll go out and if we can get to the bottom of the landslide deposits, if we can see that basal shear plane, okay, we got the geometry of this thing figured out. But if we go out there and we do some test pits and trenching and we can't find the bottom of it, then that means we got to bring out a drill rig and we got to drill down until we can see exactly what we're dealing with, how deep this thing goes, what the basal shear plane material is made of, so we can have a known strength on that. And that plays into, once that starts happening, you're talking about these studies can be upwards of $50,000,
wow,
if not more.
Yeah.
So we always take it in that phased approach. That's our approach, right? That you start with the reconnaissance level stuff. If it looks like it's more problematic, hey, then we're going to need to take it to, we'll start with the test pits and trenching and see if we can figure out what's going on. And if it goes beyond that, then it's bringing out a drill rig and it's the big guns at that point.
So a few follow-up questions on that. Let's say you do the site plan and it's like borderline, it looks like you're going to need more studies done. Could the homeowner say, okay, well, can we call you out when we dig our foundation and have you come check that as the test pit? Or would that not count?
Well,
or do they need the next study before they can even dig, right? From the county?
Yeah. So the county would require, if the initial recommendation in the geologic reconnaissance report says further study is needed, then they wouldn't allow you to go to construction before that.
Yeah.
If it is something where we say, yeah, we think this is good, we think that this is appropriate, the next step would be have somebody come out and take a look at it when you go to construction and take a look at the foundation. That's when that would happen.
Okay. So from the site plan, it's either going to be like you need further, or you're good to go ahead and dig your foundation with this report. You can pull your building permit and stuff, and then once that's dug, we'll come back out and just evaluate the soil and stuff and make sure it's good there.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And I will just add that, Weber County, Utah in general, has lots of different geologic units, right? It's a very, very diverse geologically. In Weber County, specifically Ogden Valley area, there's a lot of the Norwood Formation, which is a really problematic landslide-prone former volcanic ash that weathers to this really nasty fat clay that's slippery and wants to move. And it's one of those things where if somebody contacts me about a property, let's say like off of Old Snow Basin Road or something like that, where the property is already mapped in landslide deposits, and knowing that it has slid due to failed Norwood Formation in that area, I would tell them, look, it's better just to go to the design level study right now, rather than me going out there and telling you what we already know, that this is a problematic area. And I'm probably not I wouldn't feel comfortable in a lot of those situations, having dealt with the Norwood Formation, having dealt with a number of landslide deposits, especially if it's mapped, if it's already mapped by the Utah Geologic Survey as a landslide deposit. And for me to go out there and just look at the surface and say, I don't think it's here. I really don't like doing that. I like to have if I'm going to say the landslide is not here, I want to have justification for doing that. And so I would recommend to those folks, I'd say, hey, the reconnaissance level study will be involved, will be part of this further study, but I don't want you to pay for me to go out there once to tell you what we already know, and then have to go out there a second time.
So can an owner or somebody looking at buying a lot, can they dig the test pits or do you guys have to do your own test pits?
Sure. No, we can, if somebody if they have their own machine or they know somebody who has their own machine and can dig, we don't do the digging. Okay. I mean, we would provide our own excavator if a prospective client does not have their own. But we are happy to use, if that's going to be a cost savings for them, then absolutely somebody else can dig it. We would just want to be involved. We would want to say, this is where you're going to dig it. This is how long it's going to be. This is how deep it's going to be, et cetera.
No, that makes sense. And let's say somebody is looking at buying a house on Old Snow Basin Road in that area. I've dealt with a few lots there, and at one time I was trying to sell a lot that was in an area like that, and we kept running into an issue where I think the initial study wasn't done, but every geologist we talked to was like, you need to have further studies done, but it depends on where they're going to build and what they're going to build there, right? So is there ever a complication with that, like where, let's say I have a seller and he wants to sell this property, but do you need the plans and like where you're going to build first, or can you, before you do the study?
Excellent question. We get both. And we can deal with both. A lot of times some people will say, hey, we're interested in this lot. We don't have a clue. Like, we don't have any plans whatsoever. Right. Can you take a look at this and tell us where would be the best on this lot to build? So we do deal with that. I would say more commonly it's somebody already has an idea. They already have a site plan. They already have a proposed building envelope that they want to work with, and they'll come to us with that. And then we can go, we definitely go and look specifically in that area. Yeah. And if if where they want to build doesn't look very good, we'll say, hey, we'll take a look at a different part and say, hey, this might work. Yeah. If this one doesn't, here's another part of it that will work.
Because that's what we always, as a real estate agent in these areas, I run into it all the time. 90% of the time, the sellers don't have any of this work done. And I always compare it to like, same with septic systems, like they're trying to sell like a car and they're like, the car runs great, everything's good about it, but like we don't know if you can put a septic system on here, or we don't know what the soils are like and what it's going to take to build on it, right?
Right.
So I always feel like if you're a seller, it would make sense to go ahead and have a lot of this engineering work done. So when a buyer comes along, you're like, hey, this is all done. This is what you can build here. This is what it would take. Like, here's some reports, or at least the initial one's done, right?
Right.
Because then they have a better idea when they go talk to their builder, and then it just saves the buyer that time, headache, and gives them some peace of mind. Would you agree?
100%. I couldn't agree more. And it really works both ways, right?
Yeah.
From a seller's perspective, your home is going to be your lot is going to be much more lucrative if you're in a known hazard area, but the study's already been done.
Right.
Right. Somebody coming in saying, hey, you can just hand them the study. Here you go.
Yeah.
Like, this has already been taken care of. But we deal with a lot, and I can't emphasize this enough. We deal with a lot of people that end up purchasing something and then they realize they got a problem. Right. And they didn't work within the due diligence period to evaluate what was going on, and just kind of bought one blindly. I'll give you an example. We had a prospective client purchase a lot, his dream lot down in Provo, and he's like, well, but the city's, before I can build, the city's going to require a study here, and I said, okay, so let me take a look at what you're dealing with here, and I'll get back to you and let you know what it's going to cost. And once I dug into it, his home was on a mapped landslide. It was right below a big bedrock outcrop where there were rockfall. It was a big major rockfall hazard, and there was a fault line running right through the middle of his lot.
Holy cow.
And he had already purchased it. And I said, unfortunately, you got the geologic hazard trifecta.
Right.
Like, this is going, we can, I'm happy to do this study for you, but it's going to cost a lot. And we may tell you what you don't want to hear.
Right.
Like that we found the fault going right through the middle of your lot, and the entire thing is unbuildable.
Right.
And at that point, with that knowledge, he can't turn around and sell it because he has to disclose that it's within a hazard area. So it is so prudent from both a buyer and seller perspective that you make sure you're not dealing with anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be your dream lot. It may have the view that you want and that sort of thing, but very, very important to take into consideration the potential geologic hazards associated with it. And we're happy to work with, obviously we work with folks trying to make it work for them, right? We want people to be able to get into those homes that they want to, but we ultimately, at the end of the day, we want them to be safe.
Right.
We want them to be able to sleep at night knowing their house isn't going to fall off the edge of a cliff.
Right.
Right.
Which there is a lot of cases in Utah where, I mean, just recently in I think it was Draper, those houses that slid off, and
right.
Mountain Green has a lot of issues. Like Old Snow Basin Road's notorious for that. Up by Nordic Valley has a lot over there, some into Huntsville. So it's just, it's a buyer beware, right?
It is.
And if you don't know what you don't know, I mean, people will think, well, how bad can it be? But that's a good case where it's like, it can actually be to the point where you can't build on it, right? I think that's extreme. Most are just super expensive. Like I've heard from some builders, like, yeah, we had to spend an additional $300,000 to $500,000 to like be able to put the house here just in footing and foundation work. And that's a lot of money to anybody, right?
Yep.
And so the views might be amazing up there, but you just got to make sure it's feasible for you. So based on our conversations, it sounds like not every county and city agency is the same. It sounds like each one might be a little bit different. Can you talk to maybe a little bit of that, how different areas are different and require different things, and maybe the more stricter ones and the more lenient ones?
Sure. Yeah. And that's a really good point, that people should know that not all ordinances are the same, right? Depending upon what city or county or whatever municipality you're working with. Some are more stringent with regard to geologic hazards and the studies that are required. The slope requirements, that's really the big one. So anytime you're dealing with a slope greater than 30%, that's usually flagged as a slope stability hazard. And that's based on the fact that most landslides occur on slopes greater than 30%.
Right.
That's just kind of the nature of the beast there. So that's kind of an initial trigger. Some counties, some cities don't even let you touch greater than 30% slopes. Like you can't even have a sliver of your building footprint be within that greater than 30% slope area. Others can, if you can demonstrate from a slope stability perspective, if you've done the testing, right? You've dug the test pits, you've done some soil strength testing. A geotechnical engineering firm has done the slope stability modeling and proves that, hey, it's going to work. Slopes are going to be stable, even though you have maybe a fraction of your building footprint that is going to be on slopes greater than 30%.
Mm-hmm.
Some places will allow you to do that. Weber County, Morgan County, Wasatch County are several that are flexible in that regard. Other places, Draper City, North Salt Lake, Cottonwood Heights, those are places where you can't even touch the greater than 30% slopes. And it doesn't matter what that material is. And I've had discussions with city folks and reviewers for those cities with regard to that. And it's a good discussion. It's a good debate. But from my perspective, sometimes those slopes being greater than 30% is because there's bedrock there, which is good solid material, right? That's stuff that would be okay to build into, right? Whereas, if it's a greater than 30% slopes, that's on a weak clay. Yeah, that's the problem area. So it's good to evaluate it, but I think there's room to work within those standards to see what can work and what can't.
Yeah. Does each county, I'm most familiar with Weber County, and they have an awesome mapping system where you can see what areas are in hazard areas.
Sure.
Do other counties have that?
Some of them do.
Okay.
Yeah, some of them do. Wasatch County does not really.
Yeah.
Morgan County does.
Yeah.
Definitely some of the cities in the valley. So the cities that I had mentioned, they have on their websites, you can go and they have interactive portals that you can turn on and off layers and see what kind of hazards are available. So it's in a lot of cases, it is pretty user friendly that you can see if a prospective area that you're interested in is a hazard area or not.
Okay.
And if you have a question, it's a phone call, right? It's a phone call or an email can have that answered for you.
Right.
I mean, we're happy to. If somebody calls us up or shoots me an email saying, "Hey, I'm interested in this lot here. Can you take a quick look and tell me if this is in a hazard area, what kind of study would need to be involved?"
Yeah. So let's say it's not in a hazard area. What's your recommendation there? Maybe it's on a flat or gently sloped area. Do you still recommend having a study done, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So a geologic in that particular case, a geologic hazard area, a geologic hazard study probably would not need to happen. I will caveat that with if you're on relatively flat ground, but you're right at the mouth of a drainage coming out from the mountains where there's a potential debris flow hazard. I mean, there's still maybe a geologic hazard there on the flat ground, or you could still be dealing with collapsible soils, expansive soils, corrosive soils, right? So, I mean, in that regard, if somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you take a look at this and see if there are any hazards involved with my property?" And if I look and I say, "Hey, I don't see anything from my perspective, from a geologic hazard perspective," I would still probably recommend they get a geotechnical study done where they still go out and dig test pits, but it wouldn't be me, right? It would be a geotechnical engineer would go out and take a look so that you would be able to tell, are you dealing with compressive, collapsible, or expansive or corrosive soils, right? Because that will tell you, do you need to get rid of some of this material and bring in some structural fill that's good to build? I mean, there are places in the flat grounds where the soil is still just not very good. Right. So I would recommend that you just don't know what you're dealing with until you dig.
Right.
And it's better, from my perspective, it's a lot better that you make that investment initially to have somebody come out and look what soils are present on your ground before going and digging your whole excavation and realizing you got a problem. At which point you've already done all your architecture and your design and your grading and drainage plan, and now all of a sudden you're dealing with soils that are problematic, and you're going to have to either remove them or you're going to have to go deeper, and so your walls are going to be taller, and all those added expenses from experience, this experience that I have, it's just prudent to do that on the front end.
Right.
And that way you can move to the actual construction process knowing exactly what you're dealing with without any surprises.
Yeah. So even on a perfectly flat lot, there could be, like you said, collapsible soils, things that look okay, like it's not going anywhere, but you could still have settling issues and things like that could be of concern.
Exactly.
How often do you run into stuff like that on the flatter stuff? Out
here in the valley, a lot of times the Lake Bonneville, some of the Lake Bonneville finds, some of the silt and clay out here on the flats, that can be some collapsible stuff. Whenever you're on an alluvial fan, which is where, drainage empties out from the mountain into the valley and it deposits the sediment all in this fan, and it's generally pretty gently sloping, but a lot of times that material has a lot of void space in it and and can have some collapse. Some of the Lake Bonneville sands are really, really loose. And it's one of those things where it depends, the amount of collapse and that sort of thing depends on, if it's granular soils, so sand and gravel that has a lot of void space, that settlement's going to happen immediately once you put a load on it, right? So you're going to get, you would see immediate settlement in that regard. Dealing with a silt or a clay, that happens over years or potentially even decades,
right?
Where all of a sudden your house is 2, 3, 4, 5 feet, of some settlement there, which can be really, really problematic, right? And it's something that you wouldn't maybe notice for a number of years, but that problem is there, and it was there from the start. It just wasn't identified.
That's crazy.
So I would, again, even though, and I mean, I specialize more with the geologic hazard side of things, and so like the collapsible soils and the expansive soils, that sort of thing, that's more a geotechnical side of things. But if I'm doing my evaluation, I can still identify those and turn that over to my geotechnical engineer saying, hey, we need to run some testing on this stuff as well.
Right.
So I just think even if you have the perfect flat ground, it's well worth the investment to make sure you cover all your bases because in the long run, you don't have the cracks in your foundation, right? Or the settlement that all of a sudden your doors won't shut.
Yeah.
And that's just, we don't want that to happen to anybody.
Yeah. So if you guys come out and view stuff and give your recommendations and plans and stuff, what kind of liability do you guys have, say if there is an issue down the road?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, when we sign and stamp a report, effectively, we are taking ownership of that, saying that we feel like this is suitable, or you can, and a lot of times we will say, hey, you can anticipate up to, based upon the nature of the materials, there could be up to X number of inches of potential settlement.
Right.
Or we could say, here, we believe in all of our reports, we say it's our professional opinion that this lot, this proposed development is suitable from a geotechnical and geologic hazards perspective, provided the recommendations in our report are followed.
Right.
And a lot of times, so we will provide recommendations for if we see those elements that are problematic. We see collapsible soils, we see expansive soils, if we see landslide deposits, right?
Yeah.
We will make recommendations for mitigation. And so long as our recommendations are followed, I mean, we're taking ownership of our work there. But if they are not followed, then
it's voided basically.
Yeah, exactly.
What's let's say a client, a buyer just got a lot under contract and they want to run through this process. How much time should they plan for to get these? I guess it depends on what kind of studies needed, but just if it's just a site analysis, that's a couple weeks.
Correct. If it's just if somebody gets a hold of me and they say, my lot is this one, can you take a look and see what it would need to be done? And if I take a look and say, okay, it looks like just a straight reconnaissance level, geologic site reconnaissance level study, that's something that can be done in a couple weeks, right? It's one day to run out there for a couple hours, take a look at the site, and then, within a week or two, be able to put together that report and have that turnaround. If subsurface work is involved, that almost always involves laboratory testing. And depending upon how we do have an in-house lab, a really fabulous in-house lab, but depending upon how they fluctuate in terms of how busy they are, it can be anywhere from a 2 to 4 week turnaround time to get those lab test results back. And then we have to perform our analyses once those results come back and get the report written. So usually I would say it's anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks following the conclusion of the field work from the time we were able to issue a report, if it's the fuller study. So again, it's the recommendation is get the ball rolling as soon as possible.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people start thinking about it last minute, and this should be one of the first phone calls you make, in my opinion.
I agree.
along with verifying utilities, septic, and all that. So really a lot of these lots, it comes down to the things that we run into a lot as agents is, can you put a septic system on it, and what is it going to cost to build on it, like to put your footings and foundation there? If you can like figure out those two things, then you got a lot of there's still more stuff, but those are the big issues that we run into a lot with what we deal with. So
sure.
Is there anything else that you can think of that you feel like we haven't covered or that we need to cover?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit of it. I guess I would just reemphasize the fact that it's better to reach out on the front end before purchasing something.
Yeah.
It is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking for me to have somebody come and say, "Hey, I just bought this lot and now I realize there's this hazard." And it's like, okay, so, I'm going to be able to go out there and do the study, but I may not be able to give you the answer you're looking for. Right.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I'm going to tell you what the geology tells me is there, right? What can and cannot be done. And so it really makes me happy when people call up and they say, "Hey, I'm interested in this lot." Or I've got a contract on this lot and I'm within the due diligence period. What should I be looking for?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the fun phone calls. Those are the calls that I look forward to, because it's like, no, you're doing it the right way here.
Right.
You're not coming after the fact. You're making sure your ducks in a row. And at the end of the day, it's risk management, right? Yeah. It's a matter of how much risk do you want to incur and how well do you want to sleep at night, knowing that you've taken the steps necessary to make sure you're going to be living in an area that's free of geologic hazards or any potential settlement issues or anything like that.
Right. Who do you see pay for these? Like if it's a transaction normally, maybe you guys don't see it, but buyer, seller, if a buyer has a lot under contract, do you have any idea on that?
So we've seen both.
Yeah.
We've seen both where it has been the buyer has come in and they have contracted us to do the work. And then the cost of what our study is done that then becomes a negotiation point for what the ultimate
seller's
price will be.
Yeah.
And then other times it will be a potential buyer will demand that the seller pays for the study. Mm-hmm. On that front end. So we've seen it both ways.
Yeah, I have too. It's probably 50-50, honestly. Some sellers are just like, it's a lot, like buy it if you want it. And
yeah,
it's like so frustrating because it's like, well, we don't know what we're buying yet,
Right.
So that's where it comes down to, if you are a seller and watching this, like just get that stuff done early. I mean, that story that you told in Provo of that seller selling that lot, the guy bought it and then there ended up being all three hazards there. Like that seller made out good on that deal, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So I guess sometimes as sellers, it's better to not be aware. But if you're confident your lot's good and everything's looking good, then like it almost helps solidify the deals because like you have everything in hand. It just takes a lot of stress and pressure off of the buyers from them having to like inherit that risk and work.
100%.
So
100%. And I mean, and that's, I give a lot of people, my personal opinion, like if it was me, right? Yes, I'm a professional geologist. I do this every day. But I mean, if that was me buying that lot,
I would do it.
I would do it because I would want to make sure that my wife and kids and myself we could sleep at night, that it's really a hazard risk reduction, right? That's what it is. And being able to make sure that you can sleep well at night at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, a home is people's largest investments in most cases. And if you're sinking a ton of money into something that's just going to move or slide or break or that you can't even build on, like that's devastating to a lot of people. So that's
or if those things do happen, then you're going to be spending a lot more on that back end than you would have on the front end getting the study done.
Right. Yeah. So it definitely is peace of mind, just getting it done. So I'm glad you could come on today. This has been super.
Thank you very much for having me.
Super enlightening. And now people have a good contact. So we'll link all your info in here.
Great.
And hopefully we can help some people out get into their their dream spot. So.
Certainly hope so. That's what I hope for.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Peyton.